The 6th of June, 1944. Normandy's fields lie shrouded in smoke, the air heavy with the sting of war and a lone church bell's fading toll. Inside a cramped Sherman tank, Private Joe Johnson, a two-year-old Nebraska farm boy, grips the gear shift, sweat tracing his spine. The tank smells of metal, oil, and fear, every creak a warning of death. A German shell had just missed, showering dirt across the hull, while the crew shouts, their gun jammed, their hatch stuck. Beyond the tree line, a Tiger tank's rumble shakes the earth, its 88mm gun hunting through the fog. Joe's heart races, but his hands are steady, shaped by years fixing tractors under endless skies. The crew expects him to charge or flee, but Joe defies them all. He slams the gear into reverse, the Sherman lurching backward into the mist. In the next 10 minutes, this quiet farm kid will outwit Hitler's deadliest tanks with a tactic no manual ever taught. Courage, it turns out, sometimes moves backward. Part 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The 6th of June, 1944, late afternoon in Normandy's war-torn fields, where smoke drifts like a heavy shroud over shattered hedgerows. The air is thick with the acrid sting of cordite and the distant toll of a church bell, ringing once before falling silent, as if the world itself holds its breath. Inside the cramped, sweltering belly of a Sherman tank, Private Joe Johnson, a two-year-old from Nebraska, grips the gear shift, sweat rolling down his spine. The tank reeks of metal, oil, and raw fear, a claustrophobic box of bolts and courage where every creak feels like a warning. Joe's ears still ring from a German shell that landed just 10 feet away, showering their hull with dirt and debris. His crew is shouting. Ellis, the gunner, yells about the jammed main gun. Mitch, the loader, curses as he wrestles with the breech. The tank commander stares wide-eyed into the fog ahead, silent, paralyzed by the moment. Beyond the tree line, a deep, guttural rumble grows louder, shaking the earth. A German Tiger tank, 57 tons of steel death, its 88mm gun sweeping the mist like a predator's gaze. Joe's heart pounds, but his hands are steady. He knows the Tiger's reputation, armor that laughs off most Allied shells, a gun that can punch through a Sherman like paper. The Normandy bocage, with its dense hedgerows and narrow lanes, is a death trap for tanks. Ancient stone walls and thickets turn open fields into kill zones. Historically, Allied tankers dreaded these enclosed terrains, where visibility was often under 50 feet, and a Tiger could lurk unseen until it was too late. Joe, a farm boy who grew up coaxing life from stubborn tractors, feels the terrain like a second skin. His father taught him to read the land every dip, every slope, and now that instinct is all he has. The crew expects him to charge forward or flee, to do something predictable, but Joe does the unthinkable. Without a word, he slams the lever into reverse. The Sherman jolts backward, treads clawing at the muddy earth, tearing roots as it lurches into the fog. The crew screams not in pain, but in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" Mitch shouts. Joe doesn't answer. His eyes are locked on the side mirrors, calculating every bump, every shadow. The Tiger moves forward, slow and methodical, its barrel cutting through the haze. What Joe does next will defy every rule of tank warfare, born not from a manual, but from a farm kid's stubborn refusal to die. In the next 10 minutes, using nothing but instinct and a tactic no one taught, Joe will destroy not one but two of Hitler's most feared tanks, all while driving in reverse. This isn't just a battle, it's the moment a quiet Nebraskan redefines courage, turning fear into a weapon. The hedgerows, the smoke, the grinding gears, they're not just a backdrop. They're the stage where a legend begins. Part 2. Backtrack Joe's beginnings. Before the smoke and fire of Normandy, before the Tigers roared and the world turned to ash, Joe Johnson was just a farm kid from Seward County, Nebraska, where the sky stretched wide and the wheat fields whispered with the wind. Born in 1922, Joe grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression, a time when rural America clung to survival through grit and ingenuity. His hands were calloused from fixing tractors with his father, a man who could make an engine hum like a living thing. Joe learned to reverse a John Deere through a chicken coop without spilling a single bucket, navigating dirt roads and tight corners with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. He wasn't loud or brash. He was quiet, wiry, with a face that held more thought than words. His mother used to say he thought like a machine, always calculating, always measuring the weight of every move. When Joe enlisted in the summer of 1942, at the age of 20, he didn't look like a soldier. Tall but lean, he avoided the card games and bar fights that defined most recruits. He didn't drink much, didn't gamble, didn't raise his voice. In basic training, his peers called him Slowpoke Joe, mocking his deliberate pace. But during tank drills in Louisiana, that nickname sharpened into something else, Backtrack Joe. Joe had a habit, one that baffled and frustrated his sergeants. In every maneuver, every live-fire exercise, he'd reverse his Sherman tank backing out of mock ambushes, retreating through narrow tree lines, always knowing exactly what lay behind him. "Johnson, you gonna win the war driving backwards?" one sergeant bellowed, red-faced, during a sweltering drill. Joe didn't answer. He just kept practicing, sneaking off during chow breaks to reverse his tank down gravel roads, learning to read the terrain through mirrors, feeling the 28-ton beast shift under his hands. To his unit, it looked like hesitation, maybe even cowardice. In the early 1942s, American military culture prized boldness, charging forward, guns blazing, like the heroes in recruitment posters. But Joe wasn't chasing glory, he was studying. At night, while others slept, he pored over captured German tank manuals, memorizing the Tiger's weaknesses, the rear armor, the turret ring, the vulnerable engine deck. He read about German tank doctrine, how their commanders favored slow, deliberate advances to maximize the Tiger's terrifying presence. Joe logged it all away, like a mechanic noting a faulty gear. His father's lessons echoed in his mind. Fix what's broken before it breaks you. In Nebraska, that meant saving a harvest. In war, it meant saving his crew. Joe's caution wasn't fear of the enemy, it was fear of failure. He knew the cost of a mistake, a burned-out tank, a crew turned to ash. The teasing didn't faze him. Let them call him Backtrack Joe. Let them laugh when he reversed through a field to avoid a simulated trap. In the quiet of his mind, he was preparing for the day the Tigers would come, and he'd be ready, facing the right direction, not forward, but back. Part 3. The Normandy Trap. 3 days after the chaos of D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, the Normandy countryside had transformed from sandy beaches into a labyrinth of death. The bocaged dense hedgerows of ancient earth and tangled roots turned open fields into claustrophobic traps, where every lane was a choke point and every shadow hid a threat. Joe Johnson's unit, 4 Sherman tanks, and a lone half-track, had pushed too far ahead, their radios silent for 2 hours after a collapsed barn erased their path to a Canadian column near Comrades. Now, they sat in a fog-choked clearing, visibility barely 50 feet, the air heavy with smoke and the stench of burning fuel. Mitch, the loader, scanned the treetops nervously. "This feels wrong," he muttered. Joe didn't reply. He'd already cut the engine, letting the eerie silence settle over them. The birds had stopped singing. The flies vanished, a stillness that screamed danger. 3 days after the chaos of D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, the Normandy countryside had transformed from sandy beaches into a labyrinth of death. The bocaged dense hedgerows of ancient earth and tangled roots turned open fields into claustrophobic traps, where every lane was a choke point and every shadow hid a threat. Joe Johnson's unit, 4 Sherman tanks, and a lone half-track, had pushed too far ahead, their radios silent for 2 hours after a collapsed barn erased their path to a Canadian column near Comrades. Now, they sat in a fog-choked clearing, visibility barely 50 feet, the air heavy with smoke and the stench of burning fuel. Mitch, the loader, scanned the treetops nervously. "This feels wrong," he muttered. Joe didn't reply. He'd already cut the engine, letting the eerie silence settle over them. The birds had stopped singing. The flies vanished, a stillness that screamed danger. Before anyone could react, the first shell struck. Red 5, the Sherman to their left, vanished in a blinding flash of fire and steel, its hull torn open like tin. The crew inside was gone in an instant, the shockwave slamming Joe's tank with a wall of heat and debris. Ellis cursed under his breath. That wasn't artillery. That was direct fire. Mitch's voice cracked. Tiger? Joe didn't answer. He didn't need to. Through the periscope, he caught a glimpse of a long gun barrel sweeping through the mist, the faint outline of a hulking beast crouched low, stalking. The tiger was hunting them, its movements slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring the chase. Joe's mind raced. The Sherman's gun was still jammed, the turret sluggish, the loader scrambling to rearm. They had seconds, maybe less, before the next shot. Mitch shouted, "We can't stay here, Joe! Forward, now!" But Joe's eyes flicked to the terrain behind them, a muddy decline, uneven but open, leading to a sparse patch of trees. It wasn't much, but it was cover. The tiger pivoted, its gun aligning. Joe's hands tightened on the controls. He didn't charge or flee. Instead, he threw the gear lever into reverse, ready to turn the hunter into the hunted. Part 4. The first reverse kill. Joe's reverse maneuver wasn't just madness, it was a calculated gamble. The Sherman M4, with its 75mm gun and thinner armor, was no match for a Tiger's frontal plating, which could withstand hits from nearly any Allied weapon. Historical records from 1944 note the Tiger's rear armor, however, was thinner, only 80mm compared to 100mm at the front, making it a rare weak point if exposed. Joe knew this, his nights spent studying German tank schematics flashing through his mind. He guided the Sherman backward through the smoke, using the wrecked husk of Red 5 as a shield, its smoldering frame blocking the Tiger's right flank. The German crew, confident in their superiority, advanced slowly, assuming the Americans were fleeing. Joe's mirrors showed him everything: the churned mud, the broken trees, the Tiger's methodical crawl. The Sherman lurched backward, its treads chewing through Normandy's muddy slope with a guttural roar. Inside, the air was thick with diesel fumes and the clatter of loose bolts. The crew thrown against their seats as Joe Johnson drove in reverse, defying every instinct of his shouting comrades. "Joe, what the hell are you doing?" "Mitch, the loader," bellowed, his hands still wrestling with the jammed breech. "Hold on," Joe said, his voice calm but unyielding. "We're not running, we're repositioning." The words sounded absurd, yet there was steel in them. Another German shell slammed into the earth just ahead, spraying soil across the periscope, the blast wave hammering the hull like a fist. The Tiger was closing in, its 88mm gun cutting through the fog with lethal precision, a silhouette of menace in the haze. Inside the tank, the sensory overload was relentless. Sweat stung their eyes, the engine's heat baked their skin, and the stench of oil mixed with fear. Joe felt the terrain through the vibrations in his boots, the slope giving just enough cover. He jerked the controls, cutting a sharp angle left, baiting the Tiger to follow. The German tank pivoted, its massive weight sinking slightly into the soft ground, exposing its rear underside for a fleeting moment. "Loader!" Joe barked. "High explosive loaded," Mitch replied, slamming a shell into the breech. "Forget high explosive," Joe snapped. "Armor piercing, next." Mitch hesitated, then nodded, swapping rounds with blistered hands. Ellis, the gunner, swung the turret, tracking the Tiger's silhouette as it emerged from the fog, its commander's cupola scanning for prey. Joe stopped the tank with a squeal of treads. Turret 9, armor-piercing loaded. Ellis exhaled, loaded. Joe's voice was steady, "Take the shot." The cannon roared, the recoil shaking the Sherman like a living thing. Smoke filled the cabin, choking their lungs. Then, through the haze, an orange bloom erupted at the Tiger's rear. The shell struck true, igniting the engine deck. The German tank convulsed, its ammunition detonating in a thunderous explosion that scattered debris across the field. Joe's crew sat frozen, staring at the burning wreck, the myth of the invincible Tiger shattered in a single, impossible shot. Part 5. A moment of respite. The echo of the Tiger's destruction still rang in their ears as Joe Johnson's Sherman sat motionless in the Normandy fog, its treads caked with mud and roots. The crew, Ellis, Mitch, and the silent tank commander stared at the burning wreckage, flames licking the sky where the German beast had stood moments before. Inside the tank, the air was stifling, a mix of sweat, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Joe's hands rested on the controls, his face unreadable, lit only by the flickering glow of the fire outside. "Did we just—" Mitch began, his voice trailing off. "Yeah," Ellis whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. "We did." Joe said nothing, his eyes fixed on the flames, calculating, already thinking 3 steps ahead. The silence was broken by the radio crackling to life, a desperate voice cutting through. "Unit Bravo report. We're pinned down. Tiger in the tree line." It was another Sherman commander, part of the Canadian convoy stalled north of Calmont, their lifeline severed by the second Tiger still prowling the valley. For a moment, the crew caught their breath, the weight of their survival sinking in. Tank warfare in Normandy was a brutal dance of steel and nerve, where camaraderie was forged in shared terror. Joe's crew, though shaken, trusted him implicitly. Now no one questioned Backtrack Joe anymore. The Canadian plea over the radio underscored the broader Allied struggle in June 1944. The push inland from D-Day beaches was faltering against German defenses, and every open road was critical to breaking the stalemate. Joe grabbed the mic, his voice steady. "One Tiger down, moving to support." The response came hesitant. "Say again? You destroyed a Tiger?" Joe didn't repeat himself. He shifted gears, the Sherman's engine growling back to life, ready to roll backward into the fight. Joe's mind drifted briefly to his father's words on their Nebraska farm. "Know where you came from, and you'll never get lost." That lesson, born from guiding tractors through dusty fields, was now his compass in war. The crew's brief respite was more than a pause, it was a moment of transformation. Mitch, still shaken, let out a nervous laugh. "Backtrack, Joe. Holy hell, man. You really are fighting the Nazis in reverse." Ellis grinned, his hand steadier on the turret crank. "I'll drink to that when we get out of here." Joe stayed focused, his thoughts on the terrain ahead, or rather, behind. The orchard and ridge beyond the clearing offered cover, but the second Tiger was out there, its crew likely alerted by the explosion. The Germans would be ready, adapting to the chaos Joe had sown. The moment of surprise was fading, but Joe's resolve wasn't. He tightened his grip on the controls, the Sherman's heartbeat syncing with his own. "Reload," he said quietly. "We're not done." As they rolled backward through the smoke, the crew braced for what came next, bound by a trust forged in fire. Part 6. The Second Tiger Hunt. Joe Johnson's Sherman eased through the Normandy fog, its treads muffled by the soft, churned earth as it rolled backward toward the orchard. The crew was silent, their earlier shock replaced by a taut focus. Joe's plan was audacious. Use the gnarled apple trees and a shallow ridge for cover, reversing slowly to bait the second Tiger into exposing its vulnerable rear. The radio crackled with faint Canadian voices. Their convoy stalled under gunfire. The valley road, a kill zone dominated by the German tank's 88mm gun. Joe's eyes flicked between the side mirrors and the periscope, reading the terrain like a map only he could see. The orchard loomed ahead, its scorched branches and blackened fruit swaying in the smoky breeze, a perfect veil for his unorthodox maneuver. In June 1944, Allied-Canadian coordination was critical to breaking through Normandy's hedgerows, where German defenses turned every advance into a slaughter. The Tiger's presence threatened to stall the entire sector, cutting off supply lines and reinforcements. Joe's reverse tactic wasn't just about survival, it was about turning the tide for dozens of men. He guided the Sherman with surgical precision, backing down the ridge's slope, the tank's 28 tons groaning under the strain. "We're going to flank from behind," Joe told his crew, his voice steady as stone. "Use the orchard for cover. Make that Tiger think we're stragglers, running scared." Ellis, the gunner, let out a dry laugh. "Look like cowards to act like killers? That's your plan?" Joe nodded. "Something like that." The orchard's twisted trees swallowed them, their shadows blending with the fog. Joe's mind worked like a chessboard, calculating angles and distances. He knew the Tiger's crew would be alert now, their confidence shaken by the first tank's destruction, but their training razor-sharp. German tank doctrine emphasized control, using the Tiger's armor to dominate open ground. Joe's job was to deny them that ground. He reversed slowly, 1 foot of terrain at a time, the engine's low hum masked by distant gunfire. Through the periscope, they glimpsed the second Tiger, a massive silhouette angled left, its gun trained on the Canadian convoy, tracer fire painting the mist red. The Germans were in command, their tank untouchable, or so they thought. Joe's hands were slick with sweat, but his movements were deliberate, guiding the Sherman to hug the ridge's lip, half hidden by stumps and smoke. "Almost there," he murmured. Ellis kept the turret trained, Mitch ready with an armor-piercing shell. Every muscle in the tank was coiled, the air thick with diesel and tension. Then Joe saw it. The Tiger pivoted slightly, adjusting its aim on the Canadians, its rear armor flashing into view like a dare. The moment hung like a held breath, the orchard's silence broken only by the distant rattle of war. Joe's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He was no longer just a driver, he was a hunter, and the Tiger was about to become his prey. Part 7. The Second Kill and the Cost. Joe Johnson's Sherman sat poised on the Normandy ridge, half shrouded by the orchard's scorched trees and swirling fog. The second Tiger loomed below, its turret swinging toward the battered Canadian convoy, unaware of the trap Joe had set. "Fire," Joe said, his voice cutting through the tense air like a blade. The Sherman's 75mm cannon roared, the recoil slamming the tank as if it had been kicked by a giant. A breathless pause followed, then a fiery bloom erupted at the Tiger's rear, the armor-piercing shell punching through the engine deck. Flames licked upward, but the German tank didn't stop. It shuddered, turned, wounded but alive, its 88mm gun swinging toward Joe's position with menacing intent. Inside the Sherman, the crew froze, the air thick with smoke and the metallic screech of the turret's sluggish hydraulics. "Reload armor-piercing," Joe barked. Mitch, hands blistered from heat, slammed another shell into the breach, cursing under his breath. Ellis fought the turret crank, the mechanism groaning from dust and overuse. The Tiger's crew, now alert, knew they were being hunted. In 1944, German tankers were trained to exploit their armor's strength, but Joe's reverse tactic had turned their doctrine against them, forcing the Tiger to expose its weaker rear historically. A critical vulnerability, as Allied reports noted, hits to the Tiger's back could ignite its fuel or ammunition. Joe held the Sherman steady, its rear tucked behind broken stumps, its front catching the firelight of the burning shell. The German gun flashed, a shell screaming past, missing by inches, detonating against a stone wall behind them. The explosion rocked the tank, rattling teeth and bones. "Shoot now or we're done," Mitch yelled. Ellis didn't wait for Joe's order. The second shot thundered, the shell striking low under the Tiger's turret, where the armor plates met. The impact was catastrophic. The German tank erupted, its turret lifting skyward like a discarded crown, flames bursting from every seam. Ammunition cooked off in deafening booms, the fire turning blue as it consumed the beast. The crew sat in stunned silence. The myth of the invincible Tiger shattered again. But victory was fleeting. An unseen German artillery shell, perhaps a blind shot, landed 10 feet from their left tread. The blast lifted the Sherman off its suspension, a wall of light, sound, and heat slamming into the crew. Joe's head struck the viewport, his side pierced by a jagged piece of shrapnel. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and cold. His vision blurred, but he gripped the controls, tasting blood on his tongue. Ellis yelled, "Joe, you're hit!" Mitch, frantic, pressed a rag to the wound, shouting into the radio for a medic. Joe's voice was faint. "Tell command, objective secured." Outside, the Tiger's wreckage burned, lighting the fog orange and black. The Canadian convoy, battered but alive, began to move again, saved by Joe's impossible gamble. His eyes flickered, the battlefield fading as the pain grew distant, his hands still on the levers, guiding the Sherman even as his strength ebbed away. Part 8. The Final Moments. The Sherman tank sat half-sunk in Normandy's mud, its scarred hull glowing faintly under the orange light of the burning Tiger wreckage. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of blood, diesel, and scorched metal. Joe Johnson slumped in the driver's seat, his hands limp on the controls, dark blood pooling beneath his torn uniform where shrapnel had pierced his side. His breathing was shallow, each exhale a soft rasp, yet his eyes, glassy but resolute, found the faces of his crew. Ellis leaned over, his voice cracking. "Joe, you're hit. Say something." Mitch pressed a blood-soaked rag against the wound, his hands trembling as he shouted into the radio, "Medic, now!" But the words dissolved into static, the battlefield's chaos drowning their plea. Joe blinked slowly, a faint half-smile curling his lips. "Tell command," he murmured. "Objective secured." Outside, the fog glowed with the fire of the destroyed Tiger, casting trembling shadows through the tank's slits. The distant rattle of Canadian gunfire had softened. The convoy was moving again, safe because of Joe's impossible reverse tactic. In Nebraska, where Joe grew up, life revolved around community, where a farmer's sacrifice for his neighbor was as natural as the summer harvest. That same instinct drove Joe now, his life ebbing to save 37 others. He chuckled weakly, the sound barely audible over the dying engine's hum. "I guess I really did fight the Nazis in reverse." Ellis grabbed his shoulder, desperate. "No, Joe, stay with me. You're not going out like this." But Joe's gaze drifted, his mind slipping to Seward County's golden wheat fields, the smell of fresh earth, his mother's hands dusted with flour, the creak of his father's tractor under a boundless sky. The sensory world faded, the battlefield's roar softened to a hum, like gears winding down. Joe's fingers twitched once, as if shifting the Sherman's levers one last time, then stilled. Through the periscope's narrow slit, he caught a glimpse of pale blue sky breaking through the fog, endless and calm, like Nebraska in July. Don't be scared to back up," he whispered, his voice a thread. "Sometimes that's the only way forward." Mitch's throat tightened, his reply choked. "Don't talk like that." Joe's smile lingered, faint but certain, as if he already knew the truth. His breathing slowed, the blood on his chest no longer warm. The tank's engine coughed, sputtered, and fell silent, its heartbeat gone with Joe's. The crew sat motionless, the weight of loss heavier than the steel around them. Outside, the wind whispered through shattered trees, carrying the distant cheers of the Canadian troops, unaware of the cost. Joe's final vision wasn't of fire or war, but of home, a quiet field, a tractor's rumble, and the open sky calling him back. Part 9. The Legend Spreads. The smoke over Normandy's fields had barely settled when word of Joe Johnston's feat began to spread, like sparks catching on dry grass. By nightfall on the 6th of June 1944, whispers of a Sherman tank taking out a Tiger in reverse ricocheted through Allied camps, from muddy foxholes to battered command posts. "Did you hear? Some farm kid backed into a Tiger and blew it to hell," a Canadian soldier muttered over a cigarette, his voice tinged with disbelief. By dawn, the story had grown, not one, but 2 Tigers, destroyed in under 10 minutes, all while driving backward. The name Backtrack Joe morphed into something grander, the Reverser, a nickname that carried both awe and a hint of myth. Joe didn't care for fame, he never had. But fame found him, carried on the lips of tankers and infantrymen who saw his actions as a defiance of the impossible. In World War II, oral storytelling was a lifeline for soldiers, a way to process the chaos and cling to hope. Joe's tale became a campfire legend, retold with embellishments but anchored in truth. A quiet Nebraskan, mocked for caution, had outsmarted Hitler's deadliest tanks. The story reached Seward County, Nebraska, in a local newspaper headline, "Farm Boy Turns the Tide in France." His mother read it, tears falling before the War Department's telegram arrived, confirming her son's death. Joe's posthumous Silver Star citation praised his extraordinary tactical improvisation under direct enemy fire, but the men who fought beside him didn't call it tactics, they called it guts. The Canadian convoy, saved by Joe's sacrifice, pushed forward, their advance helping secure a critical supply route that bolstered the Normandy breakout, a turning point in the summer of 1944. Joe's reverse strategy didn't stay a one-man show. Across the front, tank crews began practicing reverser drills, mimicking his backward retreats to exploit terrain and target German weak points from unexpected angles. These tactics, born from Joe's ingenuity, were never formalized in manuals but became shorthand among tankers, a nod to the man who saw what others couldn't. His story echoed other unorthodox World War II heroes like the French resistance fighters who used bicycles to evade patrols, or the British commandos who turned retreat into ambush. In Seward County, Joe's community mourned but also swelled with pride. His sacrifice reflected the stoic resilience of rural America, where saving others came before self. The charred wreckage of the Tigers, photographed by a passing reconnaissance unit, confirmed the tale, showing German maps with Allied retreat lines cut off exactly where Joe struck. His name became a quiet legend, not shouted from rooftops but whispered in the moments when fear threatened to win, a reminder that courage could rewrite the rules of war. Part 10. The Legacy of Courage. 2 weeks after the fires of the 6th of June 1944, Joe Johnson was laid to rest beneath a small apple tree near Comrades, Normandy, his grave marked by a simple wooden cross and his helmet, dented and scorched. The Canadians, whose convoy he saved, insisted on the ceremony, their shovels scraping softly in the earth as the wind hummed through the orchard. No grand speeches were given, no reporters captured the moment, just the quiet reverence of soldiers who knew what Joe had done. His actions saved 37 lives, opened a critical path, and turned a stalled retreat into a counteroffensive, a small but vital step in the Allied push through Normandy. The story of the reverser became a whispered legend, not just among tankers but in the villages of Normandy, where locals still speak of the American who fought backward to win. By 1945, his tactics influenced Allied armored strategies, with crews adopting reverse maneuvers to outwit German defenses, a legacy etched in the mud and steel of countless battlefields. Joe's grave, later marked by a granite stone, bore 3 simple lines. Private Joseph R. Johnson, he did not retreat, he reversed the odds. Each year, on the anniversary of the Normandy breakout, a Canadian veteran would visit, placing a bottle of bourbon on the stone and sitting in silence. This ritual, rooted in the camaraderie of war, honored a man who stopped fear from winning. In Nebraska, Joe's story became a cornerstone of Seward County's identity, a testament to the quiet strength of rural America, where sacrifice for others was a way of life. His mother, clutching his silver star, found solace in knowing her son's courage lived on, not in medals, but in the lives he saved. Historically, Joe's actions mirrored the ingenuity of other World War II mavericks, like the Polish tankers who used terrain to outmaneuver panzers at Falaise, proving that unorthodox thinking could shift the tide. The field where Joe fell grew quiet, wildflowers reclaiming the scarred earth, rusted tank fragments sinking into the soil. His Sherman, left to rust beneath Normandy's weeds, stands as a silent monument, its treads frozen backward, pointing not toward glory but away from it. Joe's story challenges us. In a world that glorifies charging forward, would you dare to reverse? Not out of fear, but to save those behind you? Courage, he showed, isn't always a heroic charge. It's knowing when to step back to move forward. His legacy asks us to rethink bravery, to see heroism in the quiet, deliberate choice to defy convention. So, as the sun sets over Normandy's fields, casting long shadows over Joe's grave, the question lingers. When the moment comes, will you charge blindly, or will you, like Joe, reverse the odds? Please press like and subscribe to the channel, or wait for my latest video.